In this video, I want to cover how to convert between mass to particles and particles to mass. And you might say, well, wait a second, in this question, it doesn't say particles anywhere. What do I mean? Well, I'll just point out real quickly that particles, atoms, molecules, they kind of all mean the same thing in the sense of solving for what we're solving for here. But more specifically, we could say particles is kind of a general term that means either atoms or molecules. And then atoms are like a single atom, like one single thing on the periodic table. And then like a molecule is like multiple things combined, multiple atoms combined. But in the general sense, we are solving for how to convert between mass, typically mass is in grams, and particles, or vice versa, particles to mass. So let's look at how to approach a problem like this. The first thing that I would suggest doing is identify what you're solving for and what's given. So let's look for what we're solving for first, because that's usually mentioned first in the question. So looking at what we're solving for, let's go ahead and highlight it. We have what is the mass? So mass is what we're solving for. Mass is what we want to get. And then specifically, we want mass in grams. So you could highlight grams, so the specific units of what we're solving for. So what is the mass in grams of 7.04 times 10 to the 23rd atoms of silver? All right, so let's look at what we're given now. So we are given that we have 7.04 times 10 to the 23rd atoms of silver. So all of this needs to be taken into account. 7.04 times 10 to the 23rd atoms of silver. All right, let's look at how we should solve a question like this. We are always going to start with what's given. All right, so the first thing you're going to write down anytime you have a question like this is the number that is given. Maybe potentially you might have questions that are given multiple numbers just to try to trick you, but look at what's given. What are we starting with? So in this case, I only give you one number. It's pretty easy. So we are starting with 7.04 times 10 to the 23rd atoms of silver. So I'm going to write that down. 7.04 times 10 to the 23rd atoms of silver. And silver, if we look up on the periodic table, is Ag. All right, 7.04 times 10 to the 23rd atoms of silver. All right, and we need to do a bunch of conversions until we get to grams. That is the final unit that we were trying to get to. So we might realize, though, wait a second, how many atoms of silver are in, or how many grams of silver are in a certain number of atoms of silver? There's no direct ratio of grams to atoms. So we're going to have to do this in multiple steps. So let's look at what we have and see how we can get to grams. All right, so we do not know how many atoms there are in a certain number of grams of silver. There's no known ratio for that. It would be different for every molecule, and that would be a lot to memorize. So what we're going to do, and how we always solve a question like this, is we're going to first convert from atoms to moles, and then we can go from moles to mass in grams in this case. So let's look at how we could do that. So I'm going to move what we're starting with. I'm going to move it down a little bit so we can cover some other important things. So we said the first thing we need to do is convert atoms to moles, because we know how many atoms are in a mole. There's 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd atoms in every mole. Or we could say there's 1 mole for every 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd atoms. So let's write that down. So I'll write down that there are, sorry, I like to find some good colors. There are 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd atoms of silver for every 1 mole of silver. Okay, that is the ratio of atoms to moles. All right, and I could write the reciprocal of that just to say, there's not, we could say either that there's 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd atoms of silver for every 1 mole of silver, or we could say vice versa. There's 1 mole of silver for every 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd atoms of silver. So let's write that one down as well. There is 1 mole of silver for every 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd atoms of silver. All right, so both of those ratios are going to be really helpful here. So let's figure out which one we're going to use with what we have given here. All right, so we were given 7.04 times 10 to the 23rd atoms of silver, and we want to convert this to moles. And we might say, well, wait, how do I know which one of these ratios to use? Which one of these ratios do I use? Well, let's look at which units we need to cancel. So right now we have the units of atoms, and we got to ask ourselves, is that the final unit that I want to have in my problem that I'm solving for? And the answer is no. I want to solve for grams, not atoms. So I need to cancel out atoms and convert it to something else. Here we're going to convert from atoms to moles, and then moles to grams, because we can't directly convert from atoms to grams. All right, so we have 7.04 times 10 to the 23rd atoms of silver. I'm going to choose the one of these ratios that has atoms on the bottom. So right here, atoms is on the bottom, so it's going to cancel. So let's multiply this. Let's multiply this by that second ratio times 1 mole of silver for every 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd atoms of silver. All right, I'm gonna move this to make it a little bit smaller so we can fit we're gonna fit this whole equation on one line. All right, that is the ratio we have. That's the units we have, or that's the order that we have it in, so that I can look at it and say, hey, these two units are gonna cancel. So atoms are gonna cancel. And we are left with the units of moles. All right, here, now you have two options. You can solve this in two different steps. You could say, okay, we have this equals certain number of moles of silver. So then I'm going to go from that number of moles of silver and multiply it by another ratio and get my final answer. Or you can just solve this all in one step. And that's the way that I prefer to do it. You are welcome to do it, break it into two different steps. Since we have already learned how to do each one of these steps individually, it might be more helpful to do them individually as you've been doing. But personally, I think it just saves a slight bit of time, and you get, and I don't know, it just looks a little bit more neat to solve it all in one step. So that's how I'm going to do it. So let's erase this and solve this all in one step. So we can keep in mind, kind of keep in the back of our minds, that right now, if I were to press the equals button on my calculator, I'm going to get an answer in moles of silver. But since I don't want my final answer to be moles, I'm going to do another conversion, and then I will have my actual final answer. All right, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so that we'll have some room. Okay. We are now in moles of silver. We need to convert to grams of silver. So let's think about how we can go from moles to grams. And we've done that before. What we are going to need is we're going to look up on the periodic table, we're going to look up silver and find its molar mass. All right, to find the molar mass of aluminum, we're just going to go to the periodic table. And we're going to find, sorry, I said aluminum. To find the molar mass of silver, we're going to go to the periodic table, find silver. And here we have silver's molar mass. It's that number in the decimals at the bottom. So 107.868. We're going to write that down. So silver's molar mass we could say that it is 107.868. I believe. I'm going to double check. .868 grams of silver for every 1 mole of silver. And we could rewrite this as, flip that ratio, write down the reciprocal. We could say that there is 1 mole of silver for every 107.868 grams of silver. All right, so we have both those ratios now. Both going to be, one of them is going to be more useful than the other for us. So let's figure out which one that one's going to be. I'm going to spread this out a little bit. All right, so we had, previously we had the units of atoms canceled, and we were left with the units of moles right now, moles of silver. And we want to convert to grams. So we need to find which one of these ratios has moles on the bottom, so that moles can be canceled and we're left with grams. So that means that we're going to use this first one, and we're going to write that down. So we have 107.868 grams of silver for every 1 mole of silver. All right, and then when we do that, we're going to have some units cancel. So look, our units of moles are going to cancel. And then we're going to be left with a final answer. So let's plug this in and get our final answer here. So let's plug this into our calculator and we'll get our final answer. Because we are left with grams, which was the goal all along, to get to convert this to grams. All right, so I'm going to give myself a little bit more room, make things a little bit smaller. All right, and plug this all into our calculator. So we have 7.04 times 10 to the 23rd times 1 divided by 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd times 107.868. So 7.04 E, second E, 23 times 1 divided by 6.02 second E, 23 times 107.868. And we get a final answer of 126.1 grams. All right, let's write that down. So our final answer, 126.1 grams. Grams of what? We have grams of silver. All right, and that will be our final answer, 126.1 grams of silver. All right, so we see in that problem, we started with atoms, and we couldn't convert directly from atoms to grams. We can't do that. What we need to do anytime we're given atoms or particles or molecules, and we need to convert to some sort of mass like grams, so anytime we're given atoms and we need to convert to grams, we need to first convert to moles and then convert to grams. Moles is kind of going to be our very helpful intermediate step because we can convert from atoms to moles and we can convert from grams to moles, but we can never convert from atoms to grams or grams to atoms. So moles, if you ever get stuck, try converting to moles because it's always going to be kind of our intermediate step in a longer conversion problem like this. So hopefully that was helpful. If you need a little bit more help, I'll post another video that covers the opposite of this, going from grams to particles. So check that one out if needed.